I knew something had changed the moment my son did not pull out my chair. It was a small thing, a nothing thing, most people would say. But in 67 years of living, I have learned that the small things are rarely small. They are the first sentence of a longer story that someone has already decided to tell without your permission. The Thanksgiving table was beautiful. I will give my daughter-in-law that much. She had the kind of eye for arrangement that turns a dining room into a stage. White candles in clusters of 3, orange dahlias from the farmer's market, cloth napkins folded into shapes I could not name. The turkey sat at the center like a centerpiece itself, golden and perfect, already carved before I arrived so the presentation would not be disturbed. Everything looked like a photograph. Nothing felt like a home. There were 11 people at the table. My son and daughter-in-law sat at either end, the way married people do when they want a room to feel like their kingdom. Their 2 college friends and their spouses filled the middle on both sides. My granddaughter Emma sat near the window, and I sat in the corner nearest the kitchen, between a man I had never met and an empty chair where someone's coat had been draped across the back. My son Michael did not pull out my chair. He was laughing at something his friend said, his hand around a glass of wine that probably cost more than my electric bill. He laughed easily these days, freely, the way people laugh when they have convinced themselves that everything around them is earned and nothing is owed. I pulled out my own chair and sat down. My daughter-in-law, Brenda, moved through the room with a pitcher of water, refilling glasses with an efficiency that looked like warmth until you noticed whose glass she skipped. Mine sat empty until Emma reached across the table and filled it herself, quietly, the way children do when they have witnessed enough adult carelessness to start compensating. The food was passed around the table in a direction that completed its full circle before reaching me. By the time the sweet potato casserole arrived at my end, a generous serving spoon's worth remained, pressed to the side of the dish like an afterthought. The green beans were mostly stems. The rolls were gone. Someone laughed about carbs, and no one offered to check the kitchen for more. I ate what was in front of me without complaint. In 67 years I have survived harder meals with more grace than this one required. But it was not the food. It was the conversation I was not invited into. The plans discussed openly at that table. The new lake house they were considering in the hill country. The ski trip they had almost booked. Michael mentioning casually that the renovation they had been putting off might finally happen in the spring. His friend asking about the budget and Michael saying, with a small, satisfied shrug, that things had worked out. I know what that shrug meant. I was the thing that had worked out. Emma looked at me from across the table with that particular expression she had inherited from no one in her immediate family, a clear-eyed, slightly worried look that belonged entirely to her. She mouthed something. I could not read it. I smiled at her because there was nothing else to do. When dessert arrived, Brenda brought out 2 pies from the kitchen, pecan and pumpkin, and set them at the center of the table with a small dessert knife and a stack of plates. She served everyone before sitting down. My plate arrived last, slid toward me from 2 chairs away, a thin slice of pumpkin, no whipped cream. The crust slightly crumbled at one edge from the journey down the table. Happy Thanksgiving, I thought. Happy Thanksgiving indeed. After the meal, after the conversation had wound itself down to coffee cups and scattered compliments about the food, Michael walked me to the door with the energy of a man who had somewhere else to be inside his own house. He patted my arm once, the way you pat a dog after a walk. Drive safe, Mom, he said. Roads might be slick tonight. I drove home through the flat Houston streets with the radio off. The city lights blurred soft in the November drizzle, and I kept both hands on the wheel, the way Charles had always reminded me to, on wet roads. Charles had been gone for 8 years. 8 years of me learning how to hold the wheel alone. By the time I parked in my driveway, my house looked the same as it always had. Brick face, magnolia tree in the yard, the porch light I had never learned to stop leaving on. Inside, I set my purse on the kitchen counter and stood very still in the quiet for a long time. Then I went to my office. It was a small room off the hallway, the same room where I used to do charts when I was still working nights as a charge nurse. The desk was old, solid oak, the kind they do not make anymore, and the middle drawer held the folder I had kept updated for the past several years. Not out of worry. Exactly. Out of habit. Nurses document everything. It is how you protect people when you are not in the room. I opened the folder and read it the way I had not allowed myself to in a long time. The numbers were patient and honest in a way that my son and daughter-in-law had never been. $42,000 toward the down payment on their first house in Katy. 11 months of mortgage assistance when Michael's company downsized, and he was too proud to look for another job quickly enough. Brenda's car, because hers had died and she could not, she said, possibly manage without transportation. And they had needed my help just this once. Emma's private school tuition for 3 years running, because the public school in their district was not good enough for a child whose grandmother had worked double shifts for decades to build something worth leaving behind. I had given willingly. That is the part that no one outside the room ever understands about these situations. No one held a gun. No one demanded. They simply needed, and I provided. And the needing never stopped. And I kept believing that one day the needing would become gratitude. It did not. It became expectation. And expectation, once it settles into a household, is almost impossible to dislodge without breaking something. Near the back of the folder was an envelope I had placed there 3 weeks earlier and had not opened since. It had arrived in a stack of mail that should have been addressed only to me. My name was on the outside, but the sender line showed a financial consulting firm I did not recognize. Inside was a preliminary document, a form I knew from my years in healthcare administration, not personally but professionally. The language was familiar enough to tighten something in my chest. It was a power of attorney inquiry. Exploratory, the cover letter called it. A first step in consolidating asset management for senior family members who might benefit from assisted financial oversight. My son had requested information about taking control of my finances. Without telling me. Without asking me. Without a single conversation across a Thanksgiving table or any other table. I set the paper down on the desk and looked at the magnolia tree through the dark window for a long time. I was not angry. That surprised me. What I felt was something colder and more useful than anger. It was clarity, the kind that arrives after a long confusion lifts, not with relief, but with the steady exhaustion of someone who has finally stopped pretending. I closed the folder. The latch clicked in the silence. By 4 in the morning, I was awake without having truly slept. I lay in the dark, listening to the house settle and breathe, the way old houses do, the way old women do. Then I got up, dressed carefully, and made coffee in the kitchen. The mug Charles had given me on our 35th anniversary. Ceramic with a small chip on the handle that I had refused to throw away for 11 years now. I sat at the table with the coffee and my folder, and I thought about every decision I had made freely, and every decision I had made because no one left me another option. After an hour of that, I knew what needed to be done. Dawn was gray and damp when I drove to the bank. Houston, in late November, has a way of being cold without committing to it, a half-hearted chill that never quite becomes winter. I sat in the parking lot until the branch manager arrived, watched her unlock the door from the inside and flip the sign without seeing me. Then I went in. Her name was Patricia. I had worked with her on a trust matter once, 2 years after Charles died, when I was trying to make sense of everything he had left behind. She was efficient and direct, and she never looked at me the way some people at financial institutions look at women my age, like they are waiting for confusion to arrive. She poured me coffee and I set the folder on her desk and I told her what I needed. The automatic transfers that had been routing to Michael's household account every month. I wanted them stopped. All of them. The credit cards on my account that carried his name and Brenda's name as authorized users, I wanted those removed. The investment account I held in a joint capacity with my son, a arrangement I had agreed to years ago out of convenience and had regretted ever since. I wanted my name separated, my funds moved. Patricia worked through each item without flinching. She asked me once if I was certain, and I told her I was. And she nodded the way good professionals nod when they understand that their job is to execute a decision, not evaluate it. Then she paused. She turned her monitor slightly toward me. There was a flagged notification on the screen, time-stamped from that morning. Someone had attempted to log into my primary account at 5:51. The login had failed because of a new security protocol she had set up last quarter. But whoever had tried had entered the correct password, the old one. The one I had written on a notepad in my office drawer 3 years ago when Michael had asked me to write it down in case something ever happened to me and he needed quick access. I had believed that was love asking. I understood now it was something else. Freeze everything, I said. Every account. Change all the passwords and security questions right now, before I leave. Patricia's expression did not change. She turned back to the keyboard, and her fingers moved with a precision I found steadying. For the next 40 minutes, we worked through every account I held at that institution. Each confirmation that printed felt less like paperwork and more like a perimeter being drawn around my life. When we finished, I thanked her and stood, my knees reminding me of my age, as they had started doing a few years ago with increasing insistence. The morning sun had broken through the gray outside. I walked to my car and sat in the driver's seat for a moment before starting the engine. I had spent 31 years as a nurse. I had made decisions under pressure, in the middle of the night, with someone's life depending on whether I read the chart correctly or caught the dosage error or called the attending physician before it was too late. I had held hands and delivered news, and stayed calm when calm was the only useful thing left to offer. I knew how to act without waiting for permission. I drove next to the office of my attorney. His name was Robert Calloway, and he was the kind of lawyer who had learned over 30 years that the people sitting across from him were almost always carrying more than the paperwork suggested. He rose when I entered, shook my hand, and asked his assistant to hold his calls. I told him I needed to revise my will, completely. He listened. He did not interrupt. When I finished, he asked me one question. He asked if this was something I had considered carefully or something I was deciding in the aftermath of an emotional event. I told him it was both, and that after 67 years, I had learned that those two things were not mutually exclusive. He accepted that. We began. I had 3 primary assets: the house, which was paid in full and had appreciated significantly since Charles and I bought it in 1989. The retirement accounts, which I had built carefully over decades of working and had refused to draw down prematurely despite pressure during difficult years to do so. And the investment portfolio, modest but stable, the kind of thing that does not make headlines but keeps a person from becoming a burden. I removed my son and daughter-in-law from all of it. Everything would go into a trust for Emma, managed by a trustee independent of the family until she turned 25. Robert drafted it cleanly and precisely. Each document he slid across the desk, I signed with the steadiness of someone who has stopped waiting to feel ready. Then Robert said something that stopped me. He looked at a note in my file, something he had flagged months ago and not yet raised with me. 6 weeks earlier, my son had contacted his office asking about the process for filing guardianship paperwork for an elderly parent who might be experiencing cognitive decline. The room did not spin. I did not cry. I simply sat there and let the information find its place alongside everything else I already knew. He had never mentioned it to me. Not a word. Not a concern raised across any dinner table or telephone call. He had gone to my lawyer and asked how to take control of my life, and then he had come to Thanksgiving and handed me a crumbled slice of pie and told me to drive safe. "Let's finish," I said. Robert worked until every document was complete, signed, and filed. I left his office at noon and drove home through the kind of Houston midday traffic that requires enough attention to crowd out other thoughts. That was fine with me. I did not need thoughts. I needed lunch and quiet and the particular company of my own walls. I had barely hung my coat when my phone began. Michael first. A text that said, simply, "Something's wrong with the card." Then a call I did not answer. Then another text, "Mom, the card was declined at the hardware store in front of a client. What's going on? Call me back." Then Brenda. 2 calls. No messages. Then a text that read, "My spa appointment was interrupted because of a billing issue. Please, take care of this today." The instruction at the end of that sentence, "Please take care of this today." As if I were still the accounts payable department of their lives, I made a sandwich. Turkey. Because I had brought home leftovers from my own refrigerator that morning before leaving the house. I ate at the kitchen table and watched a cardinal on the magnolia branch outside the window. By 2 in the afternoon, Michael's car was in my driveway. I watched from behind the curtain. He sat in the car for several minutes, which was unusual for him. He was not a man who sat with his thoughts, if he could avoid it. Then Brenda stepped out from the passenger side and walked ahead of him to my porch, her movements tight with the particular energy of a woman who has decided that someone else is responsible for her discomfort. She knocked hard. I stayed where I was. Michael followed her up the steps, phone still in his hand, face flushed in a way I had not seen since he was a teenager, caught in something he could not explain away. "Mom, I know you're home. Your car is in the driveway. Please open the door." Brenda said something to him in a low voice, and he knocked again. I set my sandwich plate in the sink, folded the dish towel carefully over the oven handle, and walked to the front door. I opened it. They both looked at me with the expression people use when they are trying to decide whether to lead with anger or with appeal. Michael settled on something in between. "The credit cards are down," he said. "All of them. The mortgage is going to be late. You need to call the bank and fix whatever happened." I looked at him for a long moment. Then I said, "Come inside if you want to talk." Brenda stepped forward first. She stood in my living room like she was conducting an inspection. Arms crossed, a small, contemptuous survey moving across the furniture Charles and I had chosen together, the photographs on the wall, the quilt on the back of the couch that my mother had made and that I would sooner burn than leave to someone who saw it as inheritance. Michael ran both hands through his hair. "Mom, I was in the middle of a client meeting. Do you understand how this looked?" I sat in my chair, the good one, near the window. Charles always called it my reading chair, even though I mostly sat in it to think. "I understand exactly how it looked," I said. Brenda turned from her survey. "This is unacceptable. We have obligations, monthly payments, scheduled appointments. You can't just pull the rug out without warning." I thought about the power of attorney inquiry sitting in my folder. I thought about the guardianship call to my attorney's office. I thought about the 5:51 login attempt from my own password. I said, "When did either of you plan to warn me?" They looked at each other. The look married people exchange when they are recalibrating their strategy. I had seen that look across enough bedsides to know what it meant. It meant the approach they had rehearsed was not working, and they needed a new one. Michael tried a softer voice. "Mom, we aren't trying to take advantage of you. We're family. Everything I've asked for has been because we needed help. Wanting to help is not the same as being used," I said. I heard my own voice, steady, and I was grateful for it. Brenda made a sound that was not quite a laugh. The word criminal sat in the air between us for a moment. Before either of them could continue, the front door, which I had not fully closed, pushed open, and Emma stepped inside. She was still in her school uniform, backpack on one shoulder, and she had clearly walked from the corner where the school bus dropped her, rather than waiting for one of them to pick her up. Brenda's voice sharpened immediately. "I told you to wait in the car." Emma looked at her mother with that clear-eyed steadiness she had been practicing since she was about 4 years old. Then she looked at me. "Grandma," she said, "can I talk to you for a second?" "Of course," I said. She came to stand near my chair, and her voice was low but not low enough. She was 12, and she had not yet learned how to calibrate what she wanted people not to hear. "I heard Dad on the phone this morning," she said. "Before school. He was talking to someone about your house. He said that if you kept being difficult, there were legal options to protect the family's interests." She paused. "He said your house was the biggest asset and it needed to be secured." The room did not move. Everyone in it seemed to stop breathing at exactly the same moment. I looked at my son. He had gone the color of something drained. Brenda said sharply, "Emma, that is not what he meant. You are taking things out of context." Emma looked at her mother with the particular patience of a child who has heard that sentence too many times to find it convincing. She looked back at me. "I just thought you should know," she said. I reached out and put my hand over hers for a moment. "Thank you, sweetheart." What followed was loud and circular in the way of all confrontations that have been building for years. Michael insisted I had misunderstood, that the inquiry at the lawyer's office had been out of concern, not calculation. Brenda said I was making her the villain in a story where she had only ever tried to be welcoming. Michael said the money had gone both ways, that I had given freely, and that he had not held a gun to my head. I let them finish. Then I said, "I know exactly what I gave and exactly why I gave it. And I know what you attempted to do with my accounts this morning before I reached the bank. I know about the power of attorney paperwork. I know about the call to my attorney regarding guardianship. I have known for a while that you saw my life as something to be managed. What I did not know until last night was that I had allowed it for so long." Michael opened his mouth and then did not say anything. I said, "I am not funding your life anymore. The accounts are changed. The cards are closed. The will has been revised. What happens next is up to you." Brenda said something sharp and final and walked out the front door. Her footsteps down the porch steps were hard enough to feel through the floorboards. Michael stood in my living room for another moment, his phone in his hand, not looking at it. He was wearing the same expression he had worn at 9 years old when he understood for the first time that I was disappointed rather than angry. I had not seen that expression in years. I had forgotten it still lived somewhere under the performance of the man he had become. He left without saying anything else. Emma stayed. She sat down on the couch and said nothing for a little while. Then she said, "I'm sorry they're like this." I looked at my granddaughter, 12 years old and already apologizing for the adults in her family, and I felt something move through me that was tender and sad and completely certain. "You have nothing to apologize for," I said. "Do you understand that?" She looked at the quilt on the couch. "It's just that I know you've always done everything for us." She stopped. "I see it. Even if they don't," I said, "seeing it is the most important thing. Don't lose that." I drove her home 20 minutes later because her parents had left without her. She kissed my cheek at the door and then went inside, and I sat in the car at the curb for a moment before pulling away. Down the street, their house glowed warm and expensive in the November dark. Every window lit, all the lights on, the way it always was. I drove home to a house with fewer lights and more peace. The days that followed were quiet in a way I had forgotten was possible. No texts asking for account numbers. No calls that began with a casual hello and moved within 3 minutes to a specific financial need. My phone sat silent on the counter, and I cooked for myself and slept through the night and walked the neighborhood each morning at a pace that was mine alone to set. On the 5th morning, I was at the kitchen table with my coffee when a knock came at the door. Soft, tentative. Not Brenda's knock. Not the knock of someone who expects a door to open simply because they have arrived. I opened it. Michael stood on my porch in the kind of clothes people wear when they are not trying to impress anyone. A plain gray sweatshirt. Jeans. No phone visible. His hair was not quite combed, and he looked like he had slept poorly for several nights, which, I suspected, was accurate. He said, "Mom, can I come in?" And then, before I could answer, he said, "I don't want anything. I just need to talk to you." I stepped back. He came in and sat on the couch, not in the center the way he usually sat as if claiming territory, but off to one side, elbows on his knees, hands laced together. He looked at the floor for a long moment. Then he said, "I've been sitting with this all week, and I keep coming back to the same thing. I was afraid." "I waited," he said. "Not of you. Not of losing the money. Afraid of what it meant if I couldn't hold everything together on my own. The house, and the lifestyle, and Brenda's expectations, and Emma's school, and all of it. I kept telling myself I was borrowing time, that I'd pay it back, that I'd figure it out. But I never did. I just kept going back to you because you were always there, and I told myself, that's what family does." He stopped. The refrigerator hummed from the kitchen. Somewhere outside, a car passed. He said, "That call to the lawyer, the power of attorney thing." I told myself I was being responsible, planning ahead in case something ever happened to you. He paused. But when I say it out loud, I hear what it actually was. I was preparing to take over. Not to protect you, to protect my access to you. I said, "Yes." He looked up then. His eyes were red around the edges in the way of someone who has been honest with himself in the dark for the first time in a very long time. He said, "I became someone I don't want Emma to know." That's the part I can't stop thinking about. That she heard me on the phone and recognized what I was doing before I recognized it myself. What kind of father does that make me? "A salvageable one," I said. "If you choose to be." He let out a long breath and something in his shoulders released. He did not ask me to reverse the financial changes. He did not mention the accounts, or the cards, or the will. He sat on my couch with his hands laced together and he said he was sorry, and he said it simply, without negotiation attached to the end of it. I told him that sorry was a beginning, that trust was rebuilt in days and months and years, not in a single conversation, that I loved him with the same completeness I had loved him since the morning he was born, but that love had never been the same thing as availability without limit. He nodded. He sat with it. Before he left, he said, "Emma asked if she could call you more, just to talk." I smiled. "She can call me any time she likes." He offered a small, uncertain smile in return. Then he walked to the door and paused with his hand on the frame. "I know I have a lot to figure out," he said. "The money, Brenda, my job, all of it. But I want to figure it out myself this time." "That," I said, "is the first decision I've been proud of you for in a long time." He nodded once more and walked down the steps and got into his car and drove away. I stood at the door and watched until his taillights disappeared around the corner. Then I closed the door, walked to the kitchen, and put the kettle on. The morning after that, I woke before sunrise, the way I used to on hospital days. The body remembering its rhythms, even after the reason for them is gone. I lay in the dark for a moment, taking inventory of myself, which is a habit of nurses and of people who have been through something. I was 67 years old. I lived alone in a house that belonged entirely to me. I had a granddaughter who thought to check on me, and a son who was, for the first time in a decade, beginning to understand the difference between love and leverage. I had money that was mine, accounts that no one else could touch, and a will that said what I intended it to say. I got up and made coffee and stood at the kitchen window while it brewed. The magnolia tree was still there in the yard, bare now, in the late November chill but solid, rooted, unimpressed by the season. Charles had planted it the spring Emma was born, because he believed in that kind of ceremony, in marking the arrival of people with living things. He would have liked Emma. He had always been better than me at knowing quickly who was worth trusting. My phone lit up on the counter. Emma. Good morning, Grandma. Just thinking about you. I picked it up and typed back, Good morning, sweetheart. I'm thinking about you too. She sent a small, yellow sun. Simple, small, and exactly right. I poured my coffee and carried it to the porch. The air was cool and still smelled faintly of last night's rain. Down the street, a neighbor I had not spoken to in months was walking a dog I did not recognize, a small brown thing with ridiculous ears. She waved, I waved back. I had spent many years believing that giving was the same as being loved, that sacrifice was the price of belonging, that a mother who set limits was a mother who loved less. I had accepted arrangements that diminished me because I told myself the love underneath them was still real. And it was. The love was real. It always had been. That was never the question. The question was whether love required me to disappear. Standing there on my porch in the early morning with my coffee going cold in my hands, I finally had the answer I had been circling for years. It did not. It never had. I had only ever convinced myself otherwise, because the alternative, holding my ground, had felt too much like a kind of hardness I did not want to become. But I understood now that boundaries are not walls. They are not the end of something. They are the shape of a life that has decided it deserves to exist on its own terms. I was 67, and I was healthy, and I had money in accounts that no one else could touch, and a granddaughter who sent me morning suns and a son who was, for the first time in a long time, beginning to stand up on his own feet. I had a house with a magnolia in the yard, and a kitchen where I made my own coffee at whatever hour I pleased, and a chair by the window where no one could tell me how to sit in it. The morning moved around me, unhurried and entirely my own. For the first time in longer than I could honestly remember, that was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything. Before I went back inside, I thought about all the mornings I had started by checking my phone for what someone needed from me. All the ways I had organized my days around other people's definitions of emergency. All the years I had told myself that being needed was the same as being valued, and how long it had taken me to understand that those were two entirely different things. I did not want to be needed anymore in the way I had been needed. I wanted to be loved. Truly, freely, without conditions, buried underneath the asking. My son was learning what that meant. I believed that. I chose to believe it, not out of blindness, but out of the specific, clear-eyed hope of a woman who has seen enough of people to know that some of them, when they finally understand what they have done, choose to become something better. Emma already knew. She had always known. Some children arrive in the world with that understanding already intact, a kind of moral clarity that makes you believe, even on the hardest days, that the people coming after us will be all right. I went back inside. I washed my coffee cup. I opened the kitchen window the way I liked it, just enough to let the morning air move through. I had no particular plan for the day, no transfers to authorize, no bills to cover that were not my own, no calls to anticipate from people for whom my love had become a line item. I sat down at my kitchen table with the quiet around me and the magnolia in the yard and the whole unhurried morning ahead. And I breathed. After 67 years, I had finally learned that the most important thing a person can do is to stop giving away the pieces of themselves that make them whole. Love does not require your disappearance. Dignity does not require a fight. Peace does not require permission. It only requires that you decide, one quiet morning, that your life belongs to you, and then you live it like you mean it.